What if I told you that one of the greatest legends in FC Barcelona history also wore the dreaded white shirt of that awful Real Madrid? And Culers don't remember him quite as miserably as they do Luis Figo. What if I also told you he was pivotal in signing one of the most important figures in FC Barcelona history, while also being pivotal in signing one of the most important players in Real Madrid history, at least one who made them who they are today? Welcome to the Barcelona Podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and today we're talking about the fascinating story of Josep Samitier, a man who as a player and then afterwards shaped the history of FC Barcelona as we know it. He helped define what FC Barcelona was in the first half of the 20th century and beyond, but he also did the same thing for Real Madrid. So strap in, give a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and let's learn about Josep Samitier. Samitier was born in Barcelona in 1902 on the street Comte d'Urgell in the center of the city. He played for Catalan side FC Internacional from the ages of 11 to 17 before joining the Blaugrana. He joined them toward the end of the 1918-19 season, along with Ricardo Zamora, who we'll be talking about plenty in this history lesson. Both players debuted in late May of 1919 in a friendly pitting Barcelona against an 11 made up of international players returning from the First World War. Like any great legend, he did collect a few nicknames, including the Locust Man and the Wizard, due largely in part to his attacking football, which at the time was something that a lot of fans hadn't seen before. Now, I mentioned on this channel before that Paulinho Alcantara was maybe Barcelona's first true superstar, but due to the fact that he was a Barcelona-born boy, Sammy does have an argument for being the club's first superstar. There isn't really any video today, and it may sound simple, but he was a pioneer in simple concepts that fans in Catalonia were still getting used to seeing. Quick movements on the ball, an ability to score with both his feet and his head, and truly attacking from the midfield as opposed to being stuck in a more defensive role from a deeper position. And alongside other club legends, Zamora, Adam Platko in net, Alcantara, Sagi, Piera, Torralba, and Sesumaga, Samitier led the team in the 1920s to its first real golden age, winning 5 Spanish championships, now the Copa del Rey, and the first ever Liga trophy in 1929, plus 12 Catalan championships. I know I already set him up as one of the greatest midfielders in Barcelona history, but it was actually a move to striker in 1923 that set all that winning in motion. Between 1919 and 1932, Sammy played 232 official matches for Barcelona, scoring 184 goals. He left the club as the all-time leading goal scorer and has only since been passed by Messi, Cesar Rodriguez, Luis Suarez, and Kubala. He was also a star for the Spanish national team, playing for them at 18 at the 1920 Olympics in Antwerp. Let's also put a pin in Samitier being Spanish and not just Catalan, because that's also going to be important when we talk about his identity and where he fits in Spanish history. In the 20s, Samitier became a bit of a media sensation, becoming friends with artist Salvador Dali, singer Maurice Chevalier, and famous tango singer Carlos Gardel. And that's probably why he was Barcelona's first true superstar. Paulinho Alcantara had a ton of the stats, while Gamper was a consummate sportsman, but Samitier was a star both on and off the field in the media. And that superstar status gave him a lot of pull around the club. Unfortunately for Barcelona president Juan Coma in 1932, differences between Sami and Coma led the club legend to sign for Real Madrid, who he played for until the end of the 1934 season. He returned to Barcelona in January of 1936 for a testimonial at Les Corts, a stadium that was built in large part to the success that he helped create in the prior decade. The 6,000 people at Carrer Industria had given way to the 22,000 at Les Corts to see Samitier. But that move to Real Madrid was pretty easy for Culers of the time to forgive, because Barcelona-Real Madrid, as we know it, didn't exist the way it does now. There was no Champions League yet, and rivalries were much more localized. Madrid were a rival in what would become the Copa del Rey. There were definitely some early battles in that competition, and the newly formed La Liga, sure, but it was still the Basque side that would more largely beat the pants off the rest of Spain. If anything, it was Sammy's great friend Zamora, who defected to Espanyol, who was truly playing for the rival team. So even if he took a pit stop to the capital to make some money, Culers didn't really blame him for it. And you know what? What do I always say? Get your bag. And even in the early 30s, it was time for Samitier to get his bag. Now, here's where things get interesting and really complicated if you don't have a degree in the history of Spanish politics in the 1930s. The Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936, and Samitier was arrested by an anarchist militia who were technically on the side of the loyalists, the side that many Catalans were on. So we're quickly diving into how complicated and not straightforward everything was. He was released and allowed exile to France, but his escape was used as propaganda by the nationalist side, Franco's side. While in France, he again reunited with his friend Zamora, and they played together for OGC Nice. He retired as a player in 1939 and got his second taste of coaching with Nice in 1942 after having managed Atletico Madrid briefly in 1936. Samitier returned to his home in Barcelona in 1943, and he became Barcelona's manager in 1944. In his 3 seasons in charge, he won the club's first La Liga since the very first in 1929 and won the Eva Duarte Cup in 1945. His real lasting impact for Barcelona, aside from his time as a player though, came starting in 1947 when he became the technical secretary of the club. He brought in players like Eulogio Martinez, Evaristo, and Villaverde, but the crown jewel was Laszlo Kubala, the only other player thus far in the club's history that matched Samitier's star power on the field. And do you remember when I said that politically things were about to get very complicated? Well, it has been reported that Samitier was able to use his connections with nationalist Spain to get Kubala to Barcelona, despite the contract that had been offered by Real Madrid. It's all just conjecture, but the film The Stars Search for Peace, which speaks about Kubala's escape to Spain from the Soviet Union-controlled Hungary, was made by Franco's controlled Spain, and Kubala and Samitier played themselves in the film. So the very existence of that film should make you think about the incentives for Kubala to join Barcelona in the first place. In the inverse of that is Samitier's hand in Di Stefano going to Real Madrid. It would have been Samitier who again was at the epicenter of the saga, but it's said that Samitier was actually neutered in his ability to be the key figure for Barcelona, and he was fine with Di Stefano going to a team that he also had a soft spot for. The Di Stefano stuff is pretty wild, and fortunately for you, I have already covered it on the podcast and the YouTube channel in the past, so make sure you check that out. Now, the last gentleman to introduce to you in the story of Samitier is Heleno Herrera, Barcelona's manager of 2 La Liga trophies in the late 50s, who is known for being both a visionary as a manager, but also quite the disciplinarian, both on and off the field. He became known for his Catenaccio tactics at Inter Milan in the 60s, where counterattacking was taken to new heights the world had never seen before. But his Barcelona side were still pretty attacking with a focus on ball possession. That said, and this is oversimplifying it of course, Herrera wanted attacking football, but with control over the attack. Samitier was dogmatic to giving creative freedom to players like Kubala the way he had freedom himself. Kubala and Herrera also disagreed on this point, which is why Herrera exited the club, but not before Samitier was accused of undermining Herrera behind the scenes and thus left Barcelona again for Real Madrid, this time becoming their technical secretary. He didn't remain at Madrid long that second time either, returning to take on a job at Barcelona, again in the technical secretary role and also an ambassador role with the club. He passed away in 1972 while still working closely with the club. He is buried at Les Corts Cemetery next to Carrer de Josep Samitier, the street that leads to the Camp Nou that bears his name. So despite his multiple defections to Real Madrid, Josep Samitier remains one of the most important figures, if not the most important figure, for FC Barcelona in the first half of the 20th century. He was a pioneer, a record breaker, a puppet master, a champion, and a Culé, with just a hint of Madridista in there. But I hope you learned today just how complicated one man's legacy can be and how the binaries of sports and politics can't be oversimplified. If you want more stuff like this and not just in the international breaks, make sure you hand out those likes, those comments, those subscriptions on the YouTube channel, the good ratings on the podcast apps, and of course, if you become a Patreon for as low as $3, that helps me continue to make more shows, especially shows like this. As always, until next time, for Barça.